What would you do if your quiet sanctuary became the battleground for a war you never wanted? In the sleepy town of Willow Creek, where the air smelled of pine and secrets lingered in the shadows, my family's pond was more than just water. It was our heart, our history, our defiance. But when the HOA came knocking with their clipboards and smug grins, they didn't just threaten our land. They woke something fierce in us, something that would end in a way no one could have predicted. My name is Ellie Harper, and I grew up on the edge of Willow Creek, where our family's 5-acre plot sat like a stubborn old oak, refusing to bend to the shiny new subdivisions creeping closer each year. The pond was the centerpiece, a shimmering circle of water fed by a natural spring, where my grandpa, Amos, taught me to fish, to dream, and to stand my ground. It was where my mom scattered my dad's ashes after he passed, where I cried when my first love left, and where Grandpa, at 78, still sat every evening, his weathered hands gripping a fishing pole like it was his lifeline. The pond wasn't just ours, it was us. The trouble started when the Willow Creek HOA, led by the insufferable Karen Whitlock, decided our pond was an eyesore. Karen, with her perfectly pressed blouses and a smile sharp enough to cut glass, had been itching to control our land since her McMansion went up across the road. She claimed the pond violated some obscure HOA regulation about standing water and property values. Never mind that our land predated their gated community by decades. Never mind that the pond was natural, not some mosquito-breeding swamp. Karen wanted it gone, filled in, erased like our family's legacy was just dirt to be bulldozed. It began with letters, polite at first, then threatening. "Comply or face fines," they read. Then came the visits. Karen would pull up in her gleaming white SUV, her husband Greg trailing like a reluctant shadow, muttering about legal action while she jabbed her manicured finger at our pond. "It's a hazard," she'd shriek, as if the water itself was plotting against her. Grandpa would just sit on his porch, sipping sweet tea, his eyes glinting with something dangerous. "Let him try," he'd say, his voice low, like thunder rolling in the distance. One humid July evening, as the cicadas sang their relentless chorus, Karen escalated things. She showed up with a county inspector, a nervous young man named Tim who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Tim stammered through some nonsense about environmental concerns, but I could see Karen's hand behind every word. She stood there, arms crossed, smirking as if she'd already won. I clenched my fists, my heart pounding, but Grandpa just stood up, slow and deliberate, and invited them to take a closer look. That's when things got weird. Tim, the inspector, waded toward the pond's edge, his boots sinking into the soft earth. He was muttering about water samples when he froze, his face paling. "There's something in there," he said, pointing at the water. Karen rolled her eyes, but I followed his gaze. Beneath the surface, where the light caught just right, there was a shape big, dark, unnatural. My stomach twisted. The pond was deep, but I'd never seen anything like that before. "Probably just a log," Karen snapped, but her voice wavered. Tim shook his head, backing away. "That's no log. It's moving." Grandpa's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing, just watched as Tim scrambled back to the SUV, promising to return with proper equipment. Karen stormed off, vowing to have the pond drained by the end of the week. I turned to Grandpa, expecting him to laugh it off, but his face was stone. "Ellie," he said, "there's things about this pond you don't know." That night I couldn't sleep. The image of that shape in the water haunted me. I crept downstairs, finding Grandpa on the porch, staring at the pond under the moonlight. "What's in there?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He sighed, his shoulders sagging. "Your great-grandma used to say this pond was alive," he said. "Not just the fish or the frogs, but something older. Something that protects its own." I laughed, thinking he was joking, but his eyes were deadly serious. "Don't laugh, girl. You mess with the pond, it messes back." The next day, a new player entered the game. Mrs. Delgado, a quiet widow who lived down the road. She was an outsider to the HOA, a woman who kept to herself, tending her garden of wildflowers and herbs. She showed up at our door with a basket of lavender and a warning. "I've seen what happens when you cross that pond," she said, her voice soft but heavy. "Years ago, a developer tried to drain it. His machines broke down one after another. Then his crew started seeing things, shadows, shapes. They left and never came back." Her eyes locked on mine. "Karen's stirring something she can't handle." I didn't know what to make of Mrs. Delgado's story, but it planted a seed of doubt. Was the pond really just water? Or was there something more, something ancient, like Grandpa said? I pushed the thought aside, focusing on the fight ahead. Karen wasn't backing down. By the next morning, she'd rallied a small Army HOA board members, a lawyer, and a contractor with a bulldozer parked ominously across the road. They were ready to move in. Grandpa, though, was ready too. He'd always been a man of action, not words, and that day he proved it. As Karen and her posse marched toward the pond, demanding we sign over the rights to remediate it, Grandpa disappeared into the barn. I thought he was hiding, but then I heard the roar of his old tow truck, a beast of a machine he'd kept running since the 70s. He backed it up to Karen's SUV, hooked it with a chain, and before anyone could react, he gunned the engine. The SUV lurched, tires screeching, as Grandpa dragged it toward the pond. Karen screamed, her composure shattering. "Stop him! That's vandalism!" she shrieked. But the contractor just stood there, wide-eyed, as the vehicle slid closer to the water. Greg tried to intervene, grabbing at the chain, but Grandpa was relentless. With a final heave, the SUV tipped over the edge, plunging into the pond with a sickening splash. The water swallowed it whole, bubbles rising like a final breath. For a moment there was silence, then chaos. Karen was hysterical, threatening lawsuits, jail, everything she could think of. The lawyer scribbled furiously, and the contractor muttered about insurance. But something else caught my eye, the water. It was churning, not just from the SUV's impact, but like something was moving beneath it. The same dark shape Tim had seen was back, larger now, circling the sunken vehicle. I grabbed Grandpa's arm. "What's happening?" I whispered. He didn't answer, just stared at the pond, his face unreadable. The twist came that night. Mrs. Delgado returned, but she wasn't alone. She brought an old journal, its pages yellowed and brittle, written by her grandfather, a surveyor who'd mapped Willow Creek a century ago. "This pond," she read aloud, "is no ordinary water. The natives called it the Keeper's Eye, a place where the earth holds its grudges. Disturb it, and it takes what's owed." She looked at Grandpa. "You knew, didn't you, Amos?" He nodded, his voice low. "I hoped it wouldn't come to this." The next morning, the contractor returned with a team to retrieve the SUV. They brought pumps, divers, the works, but the pond wouldn't give it up. The pumps failed, spitting mud and strange, oily residue. The divers refused to go deeper, claiming they felt watched. By noon, they packed up and left, muttering about curses. Karen was apoplectic, but even she seemed shaken when the water churned again. Unprompted, the dark shape rising closer to the surface before vanishing. Days turned to weeks, and the HOA backed off. Karen moved away, her marriage crumbling under the weight of her obsession. The pond stayed quiet, but I couldn't look at it the same way. Grandpa grew quieter too, spending hours by the water, as if waiting for something. One night, I found him there, his fishing pole still, his eyes distant. "It's not done, Ellie," he said. "The pond took what it wanted, but it's still hungry." A month later, Grandpa was gone. Not dead, just gone. His truck was parked by the pond, his pole leaning against it, but there was no trace of him. I searched, called the police, but they found nothing. Mrs. Delgado came by, her face grim. "The pond keeps what it takes," she said, and I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. Now, I sit by the pond every evening, staring at the water, wondering what it hides. Was it protecting us or punishing us? Did it take Grandpa as payment for the SUV? For our defiance? I'll never know. The pond is still, but I feel it watching, waiting. And every ripple, every shadow, reminds me that some fights come at a cost too deep to measure. ND.